So we have a window of time that's about 2.5 hours. And hopefully that'll be enough because we're all a wonderfully engaged and talkative group of people. And so I think we've laid a lot of foundational conversation that we can keep building on. So we can obviously recall what we said and think about it as we go forward. But this part of the program is really under the theme of the individual in society. And we were even having conversations out on the terrace that kind of, go back and forth. Like if I think about, the question of congestion pricing in New York, I think it's a very interesting question of like individual rights versus like communal benefits, right? And back and forth. So that's something we can talk about. So the general outline, and the way we wrote about it initially was the inverse of like communal individual, individual to communal, communal to individual. So the outline that I have here is probing individual in society, saying, how do we describe the human condition in the 21st century, right? Like, is there anything nuanced that we need to describe about that that's different than, say, how we maybe understood that? Is human culture evolving such that our social needs are changing, right? The answer to those two questions, does this challenge the view of Aristotle's concept of zoon politikon, right? And then reflecting on inverses, the communal to the individual, individual to communal. And I ask questions like, how strong are human bonds today among strangers? Is there camaraderie amongst people that live and work in close proximity? What are the current examples of a strong communal experience or condition? And has the communal transformed to the partisan tribal? If this is so, can this transformation be reversed? So that's the outline of our conversation. And so so what I'll do is pose the question, how do we describe our human condition in the 21st century? Are there nuances that we should make? Or in this conversation, are we largely going to try to elicit what we think has been universal and therefore remains universal? So what do we have to say about the human condition in the 21st century?
What a question.
Very broad.
Well, I'm a bit pessimistic because what I feel is that we are step by step destroying the middle class. There is now some big discrepancy between some very little number of people that are becoming richer and richer and richer, and people that are getting poorer and poorer. In my district, recently, talking with a friend of mine who's working as a volunteer, this morning we were talking about a volunteer in the parish. She was talking about normal people that used to belong to the middle class of my district, that during the night, when nobody can watch them, go to the church, because at the church they are offering food and they're offering dress codes to those people that no longer arrive at the end of the month. This is terrible. And this is not only terrible in a moral way, but it has to be taken in consideration also by those that are hyper-privileged. First of all, because at certain point, if there is nobody that can spend any cents, I don't know how they can have any kind of profit if there are people that are not able to buy. But also because the history is teaching us that whenever middle class was destroyed and offended, empires, kingdom collapsed. Right. So it's necessary to be more equal, more just with everybody. And in this moment, the 21st century, to me, it's something that is completely moving in a very idiot way, because there is someone that is moving the puppets, that is manipulating the media, the information, that is brainwashing people with panem et circenses, and is not understand understanding that he's demolishing his own foundation. If the foundation collapses, he is going to collapse together with all the others.
So that raises the question. You say, like, the history of the world has moments of that sort. And I even read in the Wall Street Journal, right, a kind of place where capitalism, the free market, is sacred. They actually, one of their authors wrote that article saying he was trying to promote that capitalism and democracy go through essentially their own cycles of creative destruction, which of course capitalists love that expression. And in essence, it maybe raises people up at a certain point, but it'll inevitably its distortion might lead to, the kind of, really out of hand, disproportionate wealth to poverty. And then that usually leads to revolution, right? And then this author was arguing that makes a correction, and then maybe we're off on a better platform from that point. So, regardless, I think the point I'm trying to make is this like the human condition just showing itself in different contexts from the ancient world to the modern world, and we keep confronting, like we talked about ego and greed, or ego, and I guess we can put greed into the mix before, about how that distorts. So are the problems that we're facing in that way a new condition for the human creature, or is this just a new manifestation that is in a new context? Yeah.
It's a cycle.
That's a cycle.
It could be a cycle in morphological terms, of patterns of development. But the question is, in my eyes, and as far as I experienced it in my former job, in concrete terms,
yes,
the question is the question of magnitude and of quality. No? One thing is there always existed a cycle. Other thing is which levels of discrepancy are reached in which periods of time, and this leads to irreversible effects as a pure technical. The third aspect as regards, this is an important aspect of the human condition, for instance, as regards this diminishing the middle class. Other aspects of the human condition of the 21st century we addressed in the morning, at least we addressed it. The question is, do human beings need a real physical place for their identity? Not to speak about citizenship, but this is far, far out of the way now. No? Just the basic lived identity. Do they need real physical places for feeling some kind of community? And before that, do they need community at all? No? As a true community. And then we would have to define what is true community. And then we have to recur to the classical traditional understanding of community as a longer lasting entity. So this is no internet community I can change ad libitum, but it's a place where I belong to. No? Okay, if it belongs to the human condition that these things are at least eroded, no? And then the question is, how thoughts will go. No? Here again, what is the quality of erosion? So we have this erosion process also as a historical pattern, but here again the quality of erosion.
And magnitude.
And the magnitude. And then we have a way of no return. And this could be the 21st human condition, the 21st century human condition already. The third and last one is this ongoing urbanization. If the majority of today's world population is living in urban agglomerations, which are no cities any longer, these are just more or less amorphous agglomerations with some centers, some decentralized, dispersed former cities. And when the majority of these populations in these agglomerations is living in poor conditions, and this increasingly, this means in clear text as a trajectory, the majority of the human beings will live in miserable conditions in slums. Point. Huh? This would mean the end of culture. That's it. No?
But it's also that when you have no longer anything to lose,
Exactly.
you will do whatever.
Exactly. You will do whatever.
Yes.
Yes, and I think the other thing to add here, are the questions being asked, have they always sort of been around since the rise of at least, modernity? So if you think the rise of modernity, I guess, occurs in the 19th century going to the early 20th century, people were asking the same questions there about community, cities, and the individual. So both artists and social thinkers. So, the classic painting, The Scream,
Right.
Is all about somebody not fitting in to the city, being isolated. And then in the discipline of, say, sociology, you have Emil Durkheim creating this concept of anomie, which is all about people not fitting in to these new cities, even though cities are full of people. Anomie captures that point where you feel out of place and disjointed. Now, these concepts were being bounded around, and artists were saying this in the early 20th century, and actually some were saying it obviously before that. So are we asking old questions?
Right.
Or there's no harm in doing that, but obviously we're asking them in new ways, perhaps for, the times we're living in, but they are ones that other people have pondered, in various ways, I guess.
There might be associated since these questions since the beginning of modernity. But again, it's a question of a magnitude. And magnitude implies an irreversible evolution. And then we have a different quality. And then we cannot leave this level of quality. So at least in other evolving systems. So this is not possible. So once we reached a certain degree of social decay, for it cannot be repaired.
Or it takes,
But it's also true what Benjamin Franklin said. We're all born without the knowledge, but one has to work hard not to learn. Which is, so we never learn from our previous mistake.
I mean, obviously from a munitions point of view, we saw that, the development of warfare led to this ultimate state, and we knew pretty quickly that ultimate state was annihilation. And so in a way, you're saying the of the weapon exceeds anything ever, the magnitude of anything before, and therefore it's changed that condition of warfare forever, right? And, God willing, we're never going to have to experience that. But, so if the social decay, if the economic disparities, which are now, I guess I'm not a historian, so I can't contextualize, like in the Roman world, was it about the same, right? Or in the Ottoman Empire, what was it like there? Or if in the, the English colonial period, what was it like then, or in the Industrial Revolution? So but I think the question, so we're asking old questions to say, do we have new conditions that the old questions don't address, and therefore we have to really face those things head on? Like if people believe we don't need community anymore because they can become an influencer trained in college, and then they just need a camera and they need a microphone and they need a studio. And then as long as they get their food dropped in or by a drone or whatever, they can have this independent existence and maybe feel like they're active because they're an influencer. So these are the questions. So because I think if we're going to talk about the city tomorrow, it's really part of the question is what is the relevance of the city in the 21st century?
I'd like to add something on what we are talking about, which is first a quotation of Jeff Sparrow. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Sparrow. He's a fantastic Australian writer. And he said that all the worst nightmare of communism has been realized by consumerism. Losing our property, being controlled, and blah, 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 is everything what we are experiencing now in a super advanced version of the idea of consumerism. And the other one is a fantastic book of 2005 by James Howard Kunstler that is called The Long Emergency, and the subtitle is How to Survive to the End of Low-Cost Oil Era, which is really making some fantastic, he wrote in 2005 this book, where he was depicting perfectly what we are experiencing now. All the wars that we're going to start, to have the control of the sources that are necessary to keep alive our lifestyle, that your former president said that it was not negotiable. Because at the end, if we don't want to learn the messages that Mother Nature sends us, we have no future. We are responsible. We are considering, we are claiming to be the most intelligent animal on this planet, but the only animal that is dangerous to this planet is human. So this is something that really needs to be taken in consideration, because at the end, cycling, we always experience the same things, because there is always someone that is abusing of its power and someone that is suffering. And at a certain point, when somebody has nothing to lose, war happens, empire collapse, kingdoms collapse, popes.
Yeah, this is the point. It's again about thresholds and thresholds as magnitudes, generating a different qualities. And if you combine this with this and nothing to lose, then we are in any kind of realistic, believable dystopian scenario. And all this scenario ends with the decline of civilization plus culture as we know it. Okay. Now, to do against it, also referring to the discussion this morning, as if this is the human condition in the 21st century, and if these aspects are grim or threatening at least, okay, fine. What we can do in the direction of placemaking, a community idea, revitalizing.
I mean, I have here in my notes, just like, okay, we're thinking about the human condition, like where does love, family, friendships, meaning play in our world today compared to previous generations, right? Like the things that make us emotional, the things, that make it, that kind of drive who we, where we want to go and so forth. We know that friendships seem to be under threat. Like people are having smaller and smaller circles of friends. They might be, using online platforms to kind of keep a relationship, right? We know that, the diagnosis of mental health struggles is increasing. So I would presume that love, family, friendships, meaning those things remain important to us, but we're struggling to find space in our world to for those things that we think are important. We also, of course, we get desperate when our safety is threatened, when our health is threatened. But even, I think you were saying this about trying to do good things in your community. Do we feel we're able to thrive and flourish the way that we ought to be able to do in an advanced society, right? With all this technology, with all this learning. Yeah, one you and then you.
At Ideal Spaces here, we've been doing a series of interviews with 15 to 25-year-olds based on a conceptualization of the whole idea of internet to isolationism to depression to nihilism. And what we found up to now in talking to the people we found is most of them want family. They want to have a family, in the future. But they have really problems at the present with the conceptualization of peer group and sharing with their peer group. And they also really feel very negative about society. And their biggest worry is war. And those are the main factors up to now. We'll be doing a series of about 10 or 20 of these, and then we'll do a paper on it. But it's in talking to them, there's a real negativism. And we even had one person that we interviewed that her best friend who was 20, who had everything going for him, committed suicide. And basically, it brought a reality to her about cutting back on her internet usage, which was an interesting conceptualization. So I think from what we're seeing is that the idea of having relationships, people want them, but I don't think people anymore know how to create them.
Mm.
Well, just to spread a little bit of hope in this discussion. Starting to feel really depressive what you're contributing here, and just to maybe so some young people out there watching the video later on. So, to a huge extent, I just do not share your pessimistic view on the present and on the future. Well, because there always have been times when we faced some challenges as a mankind, or even in smaller organizations and states and communities. We always had wars. We always had plagues. We had wars and plagues combined. And what's the situation right now? And I just want to start here in Germany for a little example. We had in 2015 a huge number of refugees from the Arab world coming to Germany. And Chancellor Merkel back then said, "Wir schaffen das." So we'll manage that. We get on with that. And what's the situation right now? The situation is that 70% of these young people are working today. They're integrated by work. They got colleagues, not only German colleagues, but colleagues who live here, who came from Eastern Europe, from Southern Europe, from anywhere over the world. They're just integrated. They're delivering our packets. They're working in the stores. They're in our fabrics. So everything's quite fine. And a growing number of them is starting to qualify themselves, or even having children and knowing the value of education and knowing how important it is. If the children should have a better life, to go in advance by getting education, to get better jobs, to get everything that was the Western dream. And to a large extent, my impression is that what we've lost is that Western philosophy of just going out, pulling the shirt up, just go work, do something, create something.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing. Why is that? It's a huge extent because of the level we've reached. Just for the young generation, there's little things to achieve because they already live in their own houses. It's speaking about white middle class, and in the end, which is a focus point here in Germany, of course. They got everything. They got a huge flat TV screen. They got their mobile phones. They got let's say they use dad's car without having ever worked a single day in their own lives. So what's the better state they should strive for? What should be the motivation for them? And I guess that's a little point where we got to get in and give them a little bit more of philosophical background, what an ideal society living in ideal spaces should look like. Give them an image of what could be worth to have some work on it. And I've spent some time in Rwanda. And what you see there is totally the opposite. Lots of young people with lots of hope and lots of plans. And of course, not every hope will be fulfilled. Not every plan will work out. But in the end, they're trying to do something to advance. And that's something we shouldn't forget, that there's very good developments all over the world. And even if you're just sinking in our Western depression at the moment, maybe it's on a higher level we are just talking about. And if we just keep the level, we had that in the discussion today already, keeping the level without some growth would be keeping the level.
Right.
And apart from all issues of taxing the super rich or the billionaires, of course, that's all issues. But on an average, keeping the level, that would be a quite success. Right. And that's something we shouldn't forget. And from my point of view, we're very good in complaining, especially in Germany. We're experts in complaining, of course. But we're complaining about
Never like
a level of evolution that's it's ridiculous to complain.
Right.
And it's mostly those people who complain who already have owned houses, own cars, 2 years vacations by airplane to any nice place to work, and they don't have any need to fight for.
Right. But that is part of the war among poors, instead of understanding what are the reasons why we are in this condition. What you said is completely true, because in poor countries, you find still real life. Here, we are living in a place that is living in the illusion of some prosperity. After Margaret Thatcher, since this morning was quoted, and Reagan, then in Italy, Berlusconi came up later. But he was making copy and paste of economical strategy. And he was talking, his TV was really brainwashing people that it was a good way to live above our possibilities, to ask money to the banks, to go to have some life that was much higher than our level. We had a serious problem of young girls of very wealthy family in Rome that used to have some level of let's say lifestyle, that at a certain point they were no longer behaving correctly. We had a minor that were prostitution for high society, simply because that was a way to have some life above the possibilities. We have OnlyFans, where a lot of girls are selling their bodies in pictures to have this money, because it has been created a society that is completely fake. And it's a fake that has no future. And there is no education, because families are no longer taking care about their kids. They demand this role to the school, which is no longer doing that. And if some professor is hard with some student, is also sued by the parents, because there is no possibility to go against some modern way of behaving, which is not beating. It's simply say, okay, you are wrong. You are forbidden to say you're wrong. You are forbidden to give a bad grade. It's a society that is completely fake. And you use the word advanced society. I like to quote Edmund Burke, who said, "A healthy society is the one that maintains intact the relationship with the past. A society where the past is promoting the present and the future is a society that is evolved." So it seems like everything that is done is done. And we are forbidden to watch our back and see if maybe there is a lesson that can give us the right way to go. I would like to change the system of teaching in the school in Italy, because in the last 30 years and more has been step by step destroyed to lower down the culture. We used to have some incredibly high level of culture, but is reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced to emulate models that are completely wrong. And this is something that brings to this kind of situation where there are universities that are creating the school for influencer. This is really is not a future. It's something that is going to explode. We don't need to be Nostradamus to imagine that in a while this is a powder cake and is waiting to explode. So we need to be able to we need to be humble enough to recognize our mistakes and restart not from scratch, from zero. Because you mentioned the modernity, we are living in a completely distorted way of modernity, which is modernism, and it is a wrong misunderstanding, incredible misunderstanding of the real meaning. Because any society until the advent of modernism was step by step growing, as we said this morning. A tradition that was wrong was abandoned to be improved. But at a certain point, we decided to say, okay, scratch from zero. We forget everything that has been done earlier, because now we are living in a world that has to watch at the future. And even the future is a futurism. It's not a future. Who knows what is the future? I don't have the crystal ball, right? So there is this idea that we believe sometimes to be a kind of God that has the possibility to make whatever, but we need to go step by step.
So as in the education world, which is always like a lot of what you were saying is like, clearly for the youth population, we think of education as the opportunity to address those things. My son happened to end up in New York, you have to fight to the death to get your kid into a public high school, because you have like all these choices and it's like a crazy system. My son ended up in a really great high school. He had philosophy in high school. Like he was reading like serious, he's probably stronger in his philosophical education than I am from his high school education, which was phenomenal. But that's very rare. When I was preparing the Thomas Edsall article that I started with at the beginning of our session today, where he asked the question of these scholars about democracy in social media, one of the scholars said, let's think about the youth today in AI. And I see this in my classroom. I think any of us who are teaching see this in our classroom. And it's even a big thing on my campus right now about the use of AI. I've seen for years now, I have the students' desk, they have their laptop or a computer in front of them. And I say, let's go to Google Earth and let's go look at this town. And we're going to zoom in on Google Earth as an example of an interesting urban condition. And they will start typing, and it's clear they have no idea how to spell anything. And they're just like throwing vowels and consonants at a machine and hoping the machine is going to interpret, right? So now you have AI. And so faculty all over the world, I'm sure, certainly I know in the United States, I think in other places, are struggling that how to get students to do any writing. Because now all the writing is largely generated through AI. Every writing assignment. And the readings that are supposed to be leading to the writing almost never happen. Students are not, you assign them textbooks, you assign them text. It's really almost become impossible for faculty to try to figure out how to make that happen. So think about the future if young people are literally not reading for themselves. It's just that alone. What does that mean about critical thinking? What does that mean about creativity? I'm not to bring pessimism back to the table, but to say.
But at the end, it's not at the end, it's necessary to be realistic and honest. Because if we say, okay, it's fine, we don't open the debate and we don't bring the youth to understand that we are not their enemies, we are not the boomer, as they like to call ours. But is something we simply want to open their eyes, because they don't realize how wrong is this idea of making the life so easy. Because life is not easy. If everything appears easy, anything that is a little bit harder is avoid. And this is not only making difficult the way to grow, but is also something that is switching off their brains. I remember when I was in the school as a student in the high school, we were making calculation without a calculator. My first calculator was when I was at the university to make the exam on science of construction. So we were making radical 2, radical 3, all by hand. We were making everything by hand. Now, who can make a simple multiplication this is a serious problem. And things are getting worse and worse and worse. And now even writing is becoming a problem. When I give a test to my students, I forbid, I refuse, honestly, to write a paper on computer, because if I ask that, obviously they're going to download, and I have to waste the time to read something that is not there. So I prefer to give a written text, a written test where they have to write, because that will be there. And then it will be something that is also making an exercise to their brain, because actually people are writing only in capital letters, those that are still writing by hand, because the rest is made by computer, and the computer is also making grammar correction. And this is switching off the brain. So I'm not enemy of young people. I simply want to bring them to understand the side effect of the easy life, because the easy life, as I said this morning, is something that looks as the greatest aspiration of the human being is to become a parasite. We don't need a parasite for the future. We need the humans.
I mean, one other point I think to add, when we're looking at young people, I'm going here now, students I teach. Certainly in the UK, we've got some of the highest student university fees, I think probably in the world now. It really, really is expensive. When I went to university, I had it all paid for by the state. So I was a citizen of higher education. I had a grant paid by the state. I had my fees paid by the state. Today's students don't have any of that. So they're a consumer, right? They have to go to a private finance company to get a grant to pay their fees. So what this means is that their identity has changed. And this is with the rise of, it was Thatcher who started this. Strangely, Tony Blair really accelerated university fees. But it does mean that not only are they consumers, but although they sign up full-time, they effectively become part-time, so they need a job, right, as well as studying. So a lot of the times they're not in the class because they're quite explicit now. I'm working. So, and you can't really say much to that because universities, now we don't get money from the government so much. We're reliant on these fees that these students pay. So you've got to be careful. You don't want to start telling them off too much like you could have done when I was at university. Because as a citizen of higher education, a lecturer could say, we're paying for you, you're getting it paid for, make sure you study properly. But so when it comes to, I think from the student's perspective, they might say, well, you had the easy life. You haven't got the easy life. I'm working plus having to try and study. And I think that's one, certainly young people who go to university in the UK, that's one big thing that's occurred to our student population is this transition from being a citizen of the sort of higher education culture to being a consumer of it. And it's changed the identities and I guess also the stress students go under, like I say, having to hold down a job plus study. And I think, we have the same issues in UK universities with AI. How do we make sure we don't set coursework that students can just do via AI, and how to be sort of innovative and whatever? My point is that I think AI essays are at the moment, quite easy to spot because they tend to, the one or two I've seen, they just gloss over any in-depth debate. And it's just very, it is superficial. That's right. It's very descriptive and superficial. But I think that's the thing. Young people, I think they are. Sorry, just one last point. I think certainly in the UK, a few years ago when I was reading about their thinking, the young people are quite critical in the UK, and their voting patterns until fairly recently would certainly be more for the left. Despite being hammered with lots of problems these days. And maybe that's why they would vote more for sort of leftist candidates than certainly for the right. But yeah, so
go back to Dennis. I mean, I don't think we're being negative about you. I mean, but there's one interesting concept that sort of popped up from what Dennis said, is the world is becoming anti-immigration.
Right.
But it's the immigrant populations that come to the countries that become the new backbone of these countries.
Yeah.
They work hard, a lot of them. I mean, let's face it, not everybody's pure. There's good and bad everywhere. But the mass of them work hard. They go to school. They develop businesses. They develop industry. They develop new sub-cities within cities with their own cultures, and they mix with the culture that's there. But at the present time, our governments are anti-immigration, which means if we cut that off, we cut off this flow of new energy that comes into a country and creates and reinforces the identity of what was here. But like here in Germany, for instance, we have a very big immigrant population, as we all know, and they have businesses, they work hard, they go to school, and they're really skitty people. The problem in Germany with the youth, just from our interviews, is not that we're negative, but the Germans that were born here and brought up here and have had that certain level of luxury or goods, let's say, are burnt out. You know, they really, it's not a negative thing about them. They have been fed the wrong way by the generations before, and they pick that up and taken it to the next level. So it's not the youth that's at fault here. It's the generations before that have not instructed them the right way to lead their lives and to be in society and to use community. Because 20 or 30% of even the local youth are looking forward, as I said, to having families, and they want to have jobs and they want to work. Great. But the problem is our government are not listening, and we as adults are not listening to the cries that are coming from them saying, we want to be heard. We just ignore. And that's really where the problem is. So it's not a dislike of youth. It's basically youth is not being given the opportunity to basically, I guess you could say, allow themselves to say what they want and what they do and have an open dialogue with people, because we block it as the generations before, because we're scared of youth, because youth means change.
Right. So let's keep this conversation going and talking about, so I certainly think there's also, I think there are many facets that are leading to society's challenges, and even like faculty are optimists that, for example, we can beat the AI, kind of shortcuts that I feel the pressures on my shoulders to help the students avoid the shortcuts that are undermining their own ability to learn. And I try to work with them all the time on that. I think placelessness is another part of the question, why you feel maybe directionless, even though they have so much luxury at their fingers or have so much privilege. They have a phone in the car, access to the car. They have access to education, pretty solid education, so forth. So, I grew up in a suburban American world, and I've always compared that to, what I could do after when I got the choice to decide where to live and how to live. And I compare it to, say, other people I've grown up with, or my wife was born as an urban girl and has always wanted to be living in a big city. I think placelessness is a reason why people, there's probably a lack of autonomy when you're living in a placeless condition. The more that you're shackled to, say, a car as a means for all forms of life, that's a shackle on your ankles. The idea of just like running into people that you don't know, how much interaction do you have with strangers on a daily basis, I think is related to place and also a sense of connection to humanity. So I think we should think about placelessness. And as we talk about the city tomorrow, I think this is going to be part of that conversation. If we're thinking about the human condition here still for a little bit in the relationship of individual to society, I do think the pandemic was the pandemic was horrific. And we know that the world history is filled with, with pandemics and public health, crises like this. The pandemic was interesting in the 21st century that it, like we felt like there were a few things that could unite every person on Earth. But in the pandemic, we were all experiencing, the pandemic in one way or another. Obviously, some people were much more exposed than others, but we all knew it was happening. We were reading about, places in Australia or in Vietnam or in India or wherever. We were learning about the way that they were trying to adjust to this condition, which fundamentally was telling us we need to stay apart from each other because we're going to make each other sick. And that led to the incredible humanism of, say, people singing out their windows. I was walking my dog, Manhattan was deserted, right, during the pandemic. And I was walking my dog one day and a gentleman was just sitting by Central Park playing his violin to himself. It was just the banging of the pots out the windows when you were trying to honor all the first responders and caregivers, right? That was a pretty remarkable human moment. And you were saying, I think, that it seemed like we had some camaraderie. We had some, we were all desiring to get through this and show, and we obviously cared. The first moments we were able to go back to a park or walk down the street and it was filled with people. It was kind of a remarkable moment, right? So that disruption, it's all, it was a scourge on society. Many people lost friends and family and dear friends, but there was also a life lesson in that humans throughout history have experienced, which is going through all that suffering and then feeling like the human spirit coming out the other side. And it seems like maybe that's dissipated a lot already, but I think that was an incredible moment for us to reflect on the importance of human contact in daily life, the understanding how social, even the most superficial social contact with people is beneficial to our well-being. And so I think did the pandemic teach us some new things, or did it reset any conditions about our humanity?
Yeah. Sorry, just as a note, I've got a couple of points. One point is, the Beat of the Pans. We had the same in the UK to celebrate the NHS, the National Health Service. And my wife is a midwife. She works for the the National Health Service. And she rather cynically said, because we could hear the beating of the pans down our street, and she said, God, wait until this is over. They'll be back moaning about the NHS. And, I said, oh, you cynic. But no, the other thing that came out about COVID is it really showed other social problems in society, of course, because it suddenly made it very, very apparent. Certainly, again, in the UK, about the level of inequalities in society. So the people who are suffering most, or the highest rate of deaths in the UK, were people associated with working class jobs, people working in factories or as cleaners, etc. Female or gendered roles, so care assistants, which in the UK more women do those kinds of jobs than others, who didn't have protection but still had to go in and look after the elderly and those sorts of things. There was a higher rate of death amongst them, amongst some ethnicities. There's a lot of, obviously there's homeschooling, and then again inequalities was shown dramatically there, that people from in lower income brackets didn't have the homeschooling equipment like laptops. And so there was the positive of people being involved in voluntary activity. But the other thing, strangely, it shows what needs still to be done. Look at the inequalities, who are being worse hit here.
Right.
And I think that was an unexpected or obviously unexpected point to come out. And there was suddenly a bit of a debate in Britain about those issues. You'd hear it on the news about homeschooling. Well, people from lower incomes, they can't do this, very well because they don't have the equipment and so on. So yes, it was both the coming together, saying hello to people as you walk past them, on the other side of the road, and increasing voluntary activity, but also then showing what we still need to be done, what we still need to do, rather, the social issues we need to tackle, because COVID has shown there's tons, we need to do.
So if we're debating or thinking about the individual and the communal, did that like the exposure of all the problems, the empathy for people that were suffering the most, did that give us any bit more of a communal society than we had before? Or did it, in a way, like it feels like we might have actually had that brief uptick and then maybe we fell off a cliff, you know?
I don't know if it like, well, I mean, some research I read not that long ago said that, yeah, when it comes, because I've done research in the past on voluntary activity, which is higher, I mentioned it in the first half, but yes, it's sort of gone down, it's gone down again. You know, there was a high of people being, you know, wanting to volunteer, helping out, and it's dipped again. But I think coming out, it doesn't mean that people aren't aware of it, though, just because they've now found that they don't have the time anymore to be involved.
Right.
I think that the knowledge is still there. You know, you can't get rid of that information. Yes.
Well, I just want to have a link on what you just mentioned of the outcomings of COVID. Well, the experience that we made as a society in COVID was that we had lots of times to waste. In case of everything was just, you couldn't go out to restaurant, the cinemas were closed, theater was closed, and no festivals, nothing. And so what happened? Even faster than before, people just were bored and they just got a Netflix abonnement, or they got an Amazon abo, or they got something else to waste their time with. And that's the effect that's lasting. People just spend more and more time just on a sofa, just as you mentioned this morning, and they're still addicted to us. They just don't get out of their homes anymore, because once I have an abo, I have to take use of this abo because I'm paying for that. So you really have the effect that the people just sit at home and watch any TV series, which is followed by the next one and the next one, which doesn't do any positive to their life except for being occupied with something. But they lost their connection to society, to other people, and maybe to just spend time with other people, which of course could be a waste of time as well sometimes, but mostly it isn't, because it's social contact, it's social interaction. And that was one of the great outcomings of the pandemic, that we just changed our behavior in consuming these media.
Right. There are things that could be taken in consideration as a positive things, and things that could be considered terribly negative for the experience we had. Some of the negative are those I listed this morning. This also idea of pushing to teach from remote, to me, was completely wrong, because this was causing a serious problem. But I remember a Washington Post article that were talking about, I was really impressed, because it was talking about Italy as a social lab to see up to where it's possible to impose restriction and dictate in some way the way to do and control people before having rebellion. Because honestly, the way it was managed in Italy, the pandemic was terrible, and the side effects on kids were horrible. The amount of depression and more serious things that come later, especially in the generation which today is the one between 24 and 20, is terrible. If reading the data is absolutely terrible. And on those days, we accepted what was happening, but then learning that at the end, someone that was raising some doubts about some measure, that was arrested or was, fired from his job, knowing that they were not that wrong, that is something that is causing horrible future possible consequences. Because knowing that in the near future, if anything is going to happen, people are going to probably to do something that could be really bad. So I think the way it was managed was really, really bad and wrong. And since we have to consider the youth, I think those that were the more fragile on those days were those that were more than all the other punished. I remember, for instance, how at certain point it was obliged everybody to make a vaccination, and how doctors were afraid to say, okay, you can avoid. And we had a problem in my family, for instance, with a son that was already allergic on many different things. And his doctor's allergologist on those days, unfortunately, was in the hospital for some accident. So she was not signing any documents to say that my son was possible to be excluded. And so the doctor of the family obviously didn't decided to take a responsibility. And so we made this vaccination in the hospital in a secure place with 4 hours of control if something was happening. And nobody knew anything about the long-term effect. And 1 year later, we had some horrible situation because we discovered that his immune system was completely destroyed, and thank goodness it was recognized as a side effect. And but in the meantime, we did this only because at a certain point he was imploring us, please, I need to do it because I would like to go to the school, I would like to go to the gym, I would like to go to the cinema. And without having the vaccination, he was forbid to do it. And then we solved that problem. And 1 year later, he had the reaction on the medicine he took to solve the problem. So this is honestly unhuman, unacceptable. And in the future, we don't know what would be our response, because we responded to anything. Even for me, it was a problem, because when I made the booster, I had some increase of the blood pressure never had in my life. I was absolutely shocked. So I understand restriction, I understand everything, but if medicine says that it's necessary to make the right tests before using on guinea pigs things, I think it's necessary to allow those that are doubtful at least to be free to say, okay, I will do it only when I'm sure, because I'm not opposed, I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm afraid because I don't want to have the side effect as many people unfortunately had. And with the 4 years of delay now, we know that a lot of cases have been recognized as a consequences of that. So, now I don't want to depress anybody, but we need to.
But it's just to answer a little bit. Yeah. I'm totally with you that of course there are many individual cases that were quite severe and vaccination and so on maybe caused some problems. But to raise it up again to the societal level, what happened there? And as I've been in charge as a mayor of a city with 20,000 inhabitants, the first news we got from Wuhan was that about 2% of our inhabitants would die during the first wave of corona. That was the scientific date we had. So we have to take this into account as well. And every person in every government in every country in the world, of course, is due obliged to do the best and to prevent whatever he can do. And to be honest, I spoke some grave addresses to many people, or to people who died by corona, and that wasn't fun as well. So it's always.
But indeed, the problem was not as a political leader.
To argue on an individual case is not the same than arguing on a societal level. So that's all right. Not to contradict you in any case, no. But it's an extreme experience we suffered as a society, and if you take the overall picture, from my point of view, we excellently got through this pandemic. It was the first pandemic since the Spanish flu. In fact, the first pandemic we recognized as pandemic because in the year 2019 we had a huge
plague of 1348.
pandemic as well, which wasn't just COVID, it was something else. But we managed to get through this pandemic. And of course, there were side effects. Of course, there were things that didn't work out. There were strategies that were maybe not useful, but it's always very easy from the past to judge even the things that he did.
Indeed, at political level, obviously, they are not responsible because the instruction were coming from other levels to impose. Because at the end, I understand the restriction. I understand I don't have to walk. But imposing things like the vaccination without making much distinction among different categories of people, I think it was a little bit too, maybe it was better to wait a little bit more with more experimentation before imposing, because I think nobody was going to complain later. But in any case, to talk about the positive things, we have to recognize that that was one of the greatest representation of resilience of human being to look for a society, a community, and those people singing on the terraces. I think it was great because despite the distances, we were trying to have this human relationship.
Right. Yeah, and I think it is communal versus individual, right? Like the choices that have to be made in these situations, and there's tension, right? But it raises, like trying to care for the community. Just before we proceed, we do have an online hand up that I just wanted to invite. So Nahid, I see your hand. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me also?
Yes, we can. Beautifully. So please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I would actually, it's not more of a question, it's more of a sharing of an idea. I think I'm usually, for the all the other discussions, I was more pessimistic, but I'm a bit more optimistic in this area. What positive thing I think COVID brought was for me the idea of I feel more of myself as someone without a place. I moved around multiple countries throughout my life. I have a difficulty to identify and define my identity. But I think during the COVID, I think I was still in my 20s when COVID started. The most positive thing, even though right now we might not look at it as positive, was what social media brought in. Actually, social media, in a sense of maybe just looking at the positive side. I found people in my shoes. I found people far away from home. I found people far away from their families, worried and sick because they can't do anything for their families. Their hands are tied, and this actually built a sort of a community for me that I still hold on to after 5 years after COVID. That I found people who are in my shoes, who face the same challenges and difficulties that I faced in my day-to-day life. And it took a part of this placelessness from me and replaced it with maybe, yes, not a real community, something which is more virtual, but thousands of kilometers away from me, and replacing it with a feeling of belonging to something, maybe not in a physical sense, which is, of course, I agree, is having a physical community and feeling that I belong in a physical world is more important. But I think we need to also consider we don't always have this privilege of finding a physical place to belong and defining a physical place as part of our identity. So I think looking at the optimistic part of it, this is what COVID brought to me and maybe a lot of other people like me who are away from where they call home.
It's really powerful. That's great. And I think it's exactly, what we've been pondering. And I think that's a great example of, just as you said, like maybe qualifying the type of community, but talking about the benefit of connection. And there are benefits to even virtual connection, obviously, when you can feel empathy, when you can feel support, you can feel, other people in your shoes and so forth. That's an important aspect of that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, one thing is, by being connected, you could see what was going around the world. And I say feel that connection and gaining knowledge. I mean, we could see in the UK before it really hit us how it was happening elsewhere, and the awful nature of it, and we were hearing other stories going on. But the other sort of point that sprung to mind for me as well was the sort of sense of belonging to nature that came about from COVID. I mean, certainly in the UK, there was, people were encouraged to go into open spaces, to green spaces, not just your local park, but maybe to try other sort of places. There was social distancing, but all of a sudden there was this big awareness of health and open spaces and green spaces, and how you could connect to nature, and how it's in your interest to do this as well. And this free resource we've got in order to feel healthy in a sort of it's with mental health, right, as well as just seeing nature and walking around after being isolated through COVID. So that was another element, I think, of a sense of belonging. People's eyes suddenly opening up to the importance of getting out, right, from their immediate localities to go somewhere like a big open green space. So that certainly was a big thing,
which in Italy was forbidden, because it was allowed only to be in 300 meters from your home and nothing more than that, only for a few hours, with a certificate that was saying exactly why you were in the street, where you were going to buy something. So these differences, country by countries, were absolutely unacceptable.
Well, even within, even within the UK, when it came to social distancing, the government kept changing how far you could be from somebody. Yeah, and the police then got caught out because they'll try to regulate crowds, in social distancing, and of course the law keeps changing. So in the end, it becomes really difficult to govern. People then, what's the social distancing this week? And then the police, if there are any elements of people coming together there were protests under COVID, right. Right, okay, social protests, and so how far should they be apart, and it wasn't clear,
In terms of nature, anyway, the COVID brought something that was spectacular, because the level of pollution dropped down drastically. I never seen the sea in Italy clean like in 2020. It was, the Bahamas. Even in Ostia, which is a horrible place because of the mouth of the Tiber, the water was absolutely fantastic. And I remember, because the city was desert, a lot of animals came to the center of Rome. There is a picture with a boar on Ponte Sisto, and deers in the north. So that was the revenge of nature.
And hi, I was just following on.
Yeah, there's no projection of this. How is this reporting? Yep.
So yeah, as John was saying, talking about the recognition about access to green space and how important it is for overall health and well-being. But that again was highlighted as inequality in access to green space, particularly people living in more deprived urban areas who don't have gardens, for example, didn't have access to such good open public space. That again became another recognised aspect of what some researchers are calling a syndemic, which is where the pandemic comes into contact with those other kind of social and economic aspects. Also in terms of, you were saying the difference in or some of those issues around different, or the tension between individual and wider societal kind of freedoms and around the public health. So I was in a hugely privileged position to have worked in the government's Department of Health. That's where I first went to work there, and in the pandemic, and worked in the National Technical Policy team. So I absolutely understand that in hindsight, not some decisions weren't always correct, but the policies at the time were very much guided by the scientific advice, and of course that evidence evolved over time. And then what happened was that the medical and scientific advisors were obviously giving advice to the government, who then had to make political decisions. And some political decisions didn't always take on board the scientific advice. And also sometimes, advice wasn't always keeping up with what the evidence was telling us. So I think, everyone kind of did their best, but you're not going to get it right every time. So
exactly to that point, a fascinating part of the pandemic was in neighborhoods that suffered from a lack of open space, there were creative views of how to create new open space. So, for example, in New York City, the Open Streets Network, project took off during COVID, and all of a sudden, big zones of pavement that were dedicated to cars suddenly became closed off and became community space. And now you had people doing yoga together in the middle of the street. You had kids playing games, right? And it was, I worked with an author from Pratt Institute on research she did during the pandemic, and she was looking at this. And in Brooklyn, even when you had where people were privileged with having Prospect Park a few blocks away, one of the great urban parks in the world, when the decision was made to shut down their street, they didn't go to the park, they went to the street, and they would put chairs out, they would lay on the ground with blankets. Every night it was like a festival in that space, because they had a new community space they had never had before in their neighborhood, and they were so enamored with that what that meant to them in their neighborhood. And so that is like, I guess everything might see this upsurge and down. Some of these same spaces today are dropping off a little bit. It's hard, this city is not supporting them maybe as much as they should and so forth. But where they're maintained, they're cherished. They're cherished not only because they're interesting open spaces, it's like a new piazza created in your neighborhood that never existed before, but I think there's evidence that they found a new communal space that they'd never had before, and it's important to them.
Yes, the G version.
Not here.
City. Don't tell us the city. Just, are you in a big city when you were going through Corona, or a smaller city?
So I can actually say it. So I was in Karlsruhe, the same city that you are in.
Yeah, we're Karlsruhe. That's interesting.
So I know Dennis, before he left, was saying that a lot of people turned to streaming, and they became couch potatoes, couch people, whatever the term Ettore was offering. Certainly, in New York, the number of people running as a recreation went up and is being maintained. People appreciated the outdoor space, they appreciated health, they appreciated the effects of that kind of exercise on their daily habits. Even the work flexibility allows, for example, people to finish their Zoom call, go out for a run in the day, which they could never do if they were at the office. And when in good weather, because I live in a city of 8.5 million people, when good weather hits, the first great spring day, if you go to the sheep meadow in Central Park, there's 100,000 people there who just all came out because it's the first great day of spring. And where did they want to be? They wanted to be in a beautiful outdoor room. And not only that, not by themselves. They wanted to be surrounded. They're totally happy to be doing that in a communal way with thousands of other people around them. So that gives me hope, right? That there was a newfound view of nature. There was a attention to health. I mean, it's not like it was a panacea and all of a sudden we've solved all these problems, but I think it helped reset some of the questions about meaning, importance of life. I think at the same time, maybe we are just scarred in ways that we can never even possibly imagine, right? Just having been in, locked in your apartment, for this long time, like we're still the facts, but I think there's some aspects that are inspiring.
As I said, in Italy, there is a funny video. It's not that funny, but it's funny. Because there is a guy that used to run on the beat and was arrested by the police at the time, and he was completely alone. And that's a story. But since it was not possible to do any kind of activity, during the pandemic, I enjoyed a lot to invest my time on my passion page. I made, thanks to the media, I made a challenge that became a worldwide challenge. That was a watercolor a day keeps the COVID away. And I was making watercolor dedicated to my students because with my school we are doing a kind of grand tour in Italy. They come 1 year, they have to be spent. It must be spent in Italy to learn directly from places. And since it was not possible to travel, I decided to make this kind of ideal journey. And every day I was making a watercolor, unfortunately from picture instead of being en plein air, I like to do, dedicated to my students that were blocked in the US because they were obliged to return to the US. And so they lost all the field trips. So I made 42 watercolors for 42 days of... right.